Very much, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for getting here a little bit late. I was reminded of how challenging it can be to extricate oneself from the prayer breakfast, but it was a terrific event. I think Senator Sessions will be joining us shortly. Dr. Elmendorf, thank you for being here, and if I could just take a brief moment, Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank Dr. Elmendorf and his staff for their terrific cooperation and support during the work of the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction. That was a difficult and frustrating experience for me, but not because of your doing. and I just want to commend you and your staff for the really very, very professional, prompt, and thorough and thoughtful work that you provided and the responsiveness that you gave us.
Can I just interrupt and ask, did you find that Director Elmendorf was always in agreement with your assessment on these matters, or did you have the experience like mine that I often find he doesn't agree with my position?
It was my experience that in the most civil and diplomatic way, he expressed his disagreement. But I appreciated his candor and his help. Just a few thoughts, if I could, Mr. Chairman. First, I would suggest that the comments have been attributed to you that suggest that you may be considering pursuing a budget resolution within the committee. You and I have not had a chance to discuss that, but I would just want to encourage you as strongly as I possibly can. I think that's something the committee should take up. I hope we will, and then I hope very much that we will take this up as a full body. And I have to say, I am very, very disappointed that we're going into our third year without a budget, and I think that is a failure to accept the responsibility that the United States Senate has. I hope we will at least remedy that for this year and going forward. I understand that the Budget Control Act does provide as a substitute in certain respects, but it's certainly not a full substitute for a budget resolution. And I happen to be a fan of establishing discretionary spending caps, and that legislation, as you know, does that. But there are many other things that a budget resolution sort of uniquely addresses. And I hope that we will take it up in committee, and then the full body will.
If I could just answer you on that point, Senator Toomey. Number one, I believe the Budget Control Act has put in place for 2 years a deeming resolution, which has been used in the past to set budget aggregates, and that is in place, and it's the law. It also provides the enforcement mechanism. It also provides, as you indicated, 10 years of spending caps. I am committed to going to markup in this committee. I think it is important. The only year we didn't do it was last year, when, in effect, we got big-footed by negotiations above our pay level with leaders of the House and the Senate, Republican and Democrat, in the White House. And I look very much forward to our trying, in this committee, to find agreement. You've struggled with us. I did on the Fiscal Commission, having the group of 6. I think it'd be healthy for the body, healthy for the country. And I am looking forward to it. And one of the things we need to establish today is when we might get the re-estimates from CBO, because that could affect the timing of when we go to markup in the committee. I hope that's one thing that we can learn today, what the best estimate of the director is.
Thank you.
I don't want this to interrupt Senator Toomey's time.
Well, I won't take up too much more time. We have other members that want to speak. So let me just say a couple of points that I think are worth stressing. One is, I think it's very hard to overstate the fiscal danger we have gotten ourselves into, the severity of the challenge that we face. 2012 will be the 4th straight year with $1 trillion+ deficit. Under any scenario, we're going to add trillions of dollars of additional debt over the coming years. Under any plausible scenario, it certainly looks like our debt to GDP ratio will continue to worsen in the absence of structural reform of the big programs that are driving this program. And I would suggest that the debt to GDP ratio is probably the single most important metric we should be looking at from the point of view of our budget. We are on path such that by the end of this fiscal year, this administration and the Congress, working together or not, will have added nearly as much to our nation's debt as all the previous administrations in the history of the Republic. A quick observation, I know we all know this on the committee, but I think it bears reinforcing the point that the current law baseline is not meant to be any kind of a prediction. It's a yardstick in a way. It's a measuring tool. That's the way I look at it anyway, against which we compare policy alternatives. And I think that's important because if you look at that, at some level, one might take a quick glance and suggest that it suggests a relatively benign outlook. In fact, the outlook is anything but benign. It's very, very serious and very, very troubling. And even the current law baseline projection shows in the latter years of this 10-year window accelerating size of deficits and mounting debt and a trajectory that becomes all the more worrisome. The alternative fiscal scenario is also not really meant to be anybody's prediction of the future, I think it's fair to say, but it's probably a somewhat closer approximation to what's more likely to occur. And when you look at that picture, of course, it's very grim indeed. By 2022, under the alternative fiscal scenario, spending exceeds $6 trillion. It is 24.4% of GDP. This is a post-war structural high. It has the debt reaching 94% of GDP. And as with the current law scenario, the deficits are accelerating, they're ramping up, they're trending up in the latter years. And frankly, that's the case regardless of what set of assumptions you use, because in the absence of structural reform of the big entitlement programs, that's exactly what's going to happen. It's my view that the problem that we have is a spending problem. It is more specifically a mandatory spending problem. It's interesting to note that if you look at these scenarios, over time, discretionary spending actually drops considerably as a percentage of GDP. And despite that, we have huge spending, huge deficit, huge debt problems. There's only one possible explanation, and that is it's being driven by the mandatory spending side. And I would say, to be more precise, it is healthcare spending that is the real driver of this problem. The President himself said, and I will quote, "Our long-term debt and deficits are caused primarily by escalating healthcare costs that we see in Medicare and Medicaid that is putting huge pressure on the overall budget." The President also said, and this is a quote, "If you look at the numbers, Medicare in particular will run out of money, and we will not be able to sustain that program no matter how much taxes go up." I think that is a very important observation. I think it's exactly correct, and I think it's very unfortunate that he has nevertheless failed to give us a proposal that would change the architecture of these programs in a way that makes them sustainable and viable for the budget and also for future generations of Americans that will need it. The fact is, Medicare is growing at several multiples of the rate of economic growth. Medicaid is growing faster than that. And no significant program can grow faster than the economy for an extended period of time. It's just arithmetically not possible to sustain that. So I hope we'll use this occasion to reinforce the need to pursue in a bipartisan fashion the kind of architectural reform to these programs that's needed. The last point I would just make is that, and I think this is consistent with some of the things the Chairman said, although we have different views of how to get there, and that's just the importance of maximizing economic growth. It's, of course, primarily important to maximize growth because this is how we create jobs and elevate the standard of living of the people that we represent, the people across America. But, of course, it's also enormously important from a budgetary point of view. The CBO estimates on page 108, I think, of the report that a 1/10 of a percentage point increase in economic growth and GDP growth over the 10-year period of time generates, in their estimate, over $300 billion of additional revenue. Now, I know this is not purely linear, but let's just roughly say that means that 1% of economic growth, sustained, stronger growth, is worth about $3 trillion in deficit reduction. There is no better way to reduce the size of our deficits and help to contribute to a sustainable path than through stronger economic growth. So I certainly hope that we will pursue the policies that will maximize growth and change the architecture of the programs that are fundamentally driving our deficits. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the balance of my time.
Thank you.